Okay, so this is chapter 2 of Deer Hunting with Jesus by Joe Bageant, and the subtitle of the chapter is Redneck Pride and Fear in an Age of Outsourcing. Hopefully there's a recording of this afterwards, but this is just an experiment. Anyways, chapter 2. On the Rubbermaid loading dock, today's crew is howling like a bunch of striped-assed apes, leaning against the pallets, laughing so hard they gasp for breath. Junie Reese has a pecker pump. It came through the mailroom addressed to him. The picture and words on the box say it all. Pump it up and keep it up. A top quality, powerful enlarger featuring a 12-inch tube. A pump with pressure release trigger and ultra suction 18-inch pressure hose. Produce extra strong power with the pistol grip hand pump and pull the control to easily release pressure. Powerful bullet adds multi-speed vibrators for ultimate enjoyment. Let's see you work that old pistol grip, Junebug. Junie is the most disliked worker on the dock and a company suck-up, always there to rat out fellow workers to the supervisors. Tonight, he's getting some of what he deserves. Someone has made paycheck by mailing him the penis pump box. Turns out it didn't even contain a pump, just a nasty note. At 35, red-faced, red-haired Junie Reese has American mutt breeding written all over him, right down to the blurry homemade tattoo on the back of his left hand. Quote, is it supposed to be a knife, sword, a cross, or what, Junie? A J for Junie? Fucked up looking, J-man. Yep, the guy is a genuine rope-belted mouth breather of the old school and a bona fide company slut. Bona fide company slut. Junie's Reese is to stomp around and barrel chest his tormentors. Then, when you think it can't get any worse for him, Junie is called into the office. Mr. Reese, we cannot allow such disturbance during the workday, so I'm going to have to ask you not to receive personal packages at work or through the Rubbermaid mailroom. Is that clear? Junie explains that it was a prank. The supervisor replies, just the same, I'm going to have to take note of this, and my warning still applies. Junie nods a yes, sir, and leaves, after which the supervisor bursts out laughing. From the highway, Rubbermaid's Winchester plant doesn't look very interesting, much less like a slapstick Comedy Central. But once inside, you see that it's a small city, a hermetically sealed culture in which every person is watched, and every emotion is documented as each cell in the hive strains to produce more and more plastic pails, drain boards, refuse containers, and spatulas. A cell named Miscellaneous 1 makes small wastebaskets and 11 by 24-inch stand-up signs that say, caution, wet floor, and can be found in public buildings in half the nations on the globe. Miscellaneous 2 makes mop buckets, rubber spoons, and trash can lids. There is a structural foam, where carts are made, and engineered plastics, the brute department, more on that later. And then there's rotational molding, known as the salt mines. On Rotational's door is a picture of an arm flexing its muscles, and it is here the toughest men in the plant run the steel behemoths that make yard carts and other large items. In this dark, loud inferno, tons of plastic pellets become molten liquid before they are squirted into injection molds so large as to spit out whole plastic garden sheds at some Rubbermaid plants, though not at this one. The oven doors open and the carts and containers are yanked off in a relentless rhythm. Rotational molding is, as they say, no place for little guys, and little guys are damn happy not to be there. Even humping it on the loading dock beats the Iron Man stuff in Rotational. As often as we hear about U.S. plants moving by the thousands to Mexico, then to China, millions of Americans still labor in manufacturing. And as manufacturing plants go, Rubbermaid has always been considered one of the better places to work. Although it is true that for half a century, manufacturers such as Rubbermaid have been operating in heartland places like Virginia to scarf on our cheap, ass-busting, anti-union redneck labor force, plenty of us have prospered under their lights, including me. In 1967, not long after I got out of the Navy, I worked at Rubbermaid before leaving for life out west in 1969. My wage at Rubbermaid, $1.65 an hour, supported my new young family, my wife Cindy, and my infant son Tim. In those days, health insurance at most jobs was free or almost free. I carried my gray steel lunchbox proudly as a family man, and Cindy relished her time with the baby and threw herself into fixing up the first home either of us had ever made on our own. There was dignity in working-class life and family for both of us. We were anxious to prove worthy of adulthood in the world as we knew it. 33 years later, I found myself back in Winchester and close to Rubbermaid workers again. While waiting for my Oregon house to sell, I spent 3 months living with 34-year-old Tim, who had been pulling rotating shifts at Rubbermaid for 5 years. What I saw broke my heart. The working-class world of my son's Rubbermaid friends was so harsh and insecure and barren of the dignity of labor that I damn near cried. Some commuted more than 100 miles from West Virginia to work, spending 4 or 5 hours a day in transit. One vanload of workers commuted almost 7 hours a day, taking turns driving while the rest caught what sleep they could. Some slept on couches and in sleeping bags at Tim's when the snow was too deep to drive home, which is often enough when you live in the mountains of West Virginia. Most were family men, some older, others barely out of high school, living in mobile homes or modulars. They were decent and quiet men who always left the place clean, stepped politely out onto the frozen porch to smoke a cigarette, and did not drink. All seemed worried to death about a possible plant move overseas and about bills, medical bills in particular. Their wives worked, yet they barely kept their heads above water. At the same time, Rubbermaid Winchester appeared to be booming. Overtime was plentiful, and the company had just expanded. So why did these workers look like burned-out zombies for lack of sleep? And why were they unable to break even with overtime? For decades, Virginia has hemorrhaged manufacturing and textile jobs to foreign shores, the flow increasing after NAFTA went into effect in 1994. But long before NAFTA, we had a history of state leadership hiking its skirts and winking at any miserable Yankee sweatshop coming down the pike on its way toward Alabama or Mississippi or Latin America. The big shots make a mint selling property to the northern manufacturers, and the state and local governments make speeches about how many new jobs they delivered. So it's not too surprising in 2002 when Mark Werner proclaimed that Virginia had beat out Mexico in scoring 240 additional Rubbermaid jobs at the 900-employee Newell Rubbermaid Winchester plant, which meant that our venerable town had consummated 250 years of American progress by beating out the city of Cadereyta, the broomstick-making capital of Mexico. And in order to knock out Cadereyta, also known for its pit-cooked hog skin, the city of Winchester and the state had to cough up about $1 million to Rubbermaid for expansion assistance on its $50 million expansion. $1 million is a lot to a town like Winchester and not much to Rubbermaid. It was rather like the schoolyard bully giving you a Dutch rub on the scalp with his knuckles after already making you hand over your milk money. He does it because he can. At any rate, everyone cheered when the governor indicated that the roadside skirt hitching was the hallmark of a business-friendly climate in Virginia. A Rubbermaid flack remarked on Winchesterians' dependability and unquestionable work ethic, otherwise known as anti-unionism and the willingness to take benefit cuts on the chin and keep grinning. Now, at the risk of sounding culturally chauvinistic, I must say it's darn embarrassing to have to whip the pit-cooked hogskin capital of Mexico to keep our jobs. As a humanist, I'm glad to see the leveling of the global playing field. After all, Americans, including Winchester's working people, are consuming far more of the Earth's resources than anyone rightly should, drinking half a gallon of Diet Pepsi from Dukes of Hazzard light-emitting mugs and yapping on throwaway cell phones, or buying beer can-holding hats with plastic tubing that goes into the wearer's mouth for $10 at Walmart, the wellspring of all strange and unnecessary purchases. Indeed, the huge success of Junk Mart may be proof that American workers cannot be trusted with a decent wage. The jury is out. Still, something tells me that Newell Rubbermaid is not motivated by a desire to redistribute the world's wealth. Beyond that, and what can only be called a selfless contribution to cross-cultural understanding, Rubbermaid brings into the Winchester plant ever-increasing numbers of what some Anglo workers call little brown guys, to work alongside the corpulent, red-faced natives. Leased from temp agency, they work for less and are disposable, expressing their gratitude by disappearing on command. Contrary to logic, however, few Anglo employees appear openly resentful. Quote, "It's what we gotta do to keep plants in this country and stay competitive. I ain't prejudiced. I got nothing against Mexicans," one employee told me. And so have others. I can only conclude they are lying through their teeth, have been indoctrinated by the company, or are so damn dumb they can barely stand up. My money is on lying. Top hourly wages at Rubbermaid now run as high as $15 up to $32,000 a year. Good money by local standards, despite the fact that its purchasing power has dropped by more than a third since the day Rubbermaid opened. Forget that $15 is really $11 or less. Forget that the health insurance costing $250 a month for one person, with a $1,200 deductible, pays only 80% of medical bills. Here in Winchester, we have been pistol whipped into a proper sense of gratitude, so this is considered a good deal. It is a good deal until you have serious medical problems, like Joey Cave, who recently hung up his Rubbermaid goggles for good and is limping over to my table at Royal Lunch to flop down. He is 5 years younger than me, but looks much worse than I do, and I look like hell. Mine is mostly ugliness and fat, but Joey shows the marks of years spent in Winchester's working class. He has been worked half to death, crippled up, then bled for every remaining penny by doctors and lawyers. In other words, he's your average older working factory guy these days. Last year he blew out 2 lumbar discs, good old L4 and L5, cripplers of working folks everywhere, including yours truly, and workers' comp paid the medical and surgical costs. Quote, "But when the doctor said I need a hip transplant too, Rubbermaid said no way. They said it ain't got anything to do with working there, so it ain't covered." Well, Joey, I figure you must have worn those hip joints out on the couch, because that's the only damn place you put in time besides Rubbermaid. Yeah, I guess so, he smiles. Cheap couches, they'll kill you. Even without the needed hip replacement, Joey is still left holding the bag on $6,000. But hey, I got me a lawyer, he says. That makes me kind of sad because I know the lawyer, a local buzzard specializing in such claims. Part of the predatory middle class that swears it is not predatory, the buzzard lawyer, a good Democrat, has lit on the situation and will extract a quick and dirty settlement from Rubbermaid, call off a chunk for legal fees, then fly off, leaving Joey with a couple thousand if he's lucky. But until Joey nabs that big check from Rubbermaid, one that equals maybe 1 or 2 months take-home pay at his former wage, he lives on $480 a month workers' disability insurance and pays $320 a month on a shared house. So if he wants to stop by Royal Lunch 2 evenings a week for a $2 Schlitz, I say, fucking A straight, let me buy you one, Joey. Do you need smokes, buddy? At one point when writing this book, I decided it would add a splash of the juice of authenticity if I dragged my sorry bones down to Rubbermaid for a shift or two. In the old days, all you had to do was park in the lot and walk in and tell the receptionist, "I want to see Joe Bones," or whoever, and somebody, most likely someone you knew, would hand you a pair of safety goggles and point you in the right direction. Now it's more like cracking a safe. From experience, I can tell you it's almost easier for a writer to get access to the state pen than it is to be allowed to watch working Americans make plastic dishpans on the night shift. In both cases, it starts with at least some claim to being part of the print establishment and then talking to the right man. From the receptionist at Rubbermaid, I learned that the right man was Joe DeZarn, Director of Marketing Communications. Evidently, they made him handle the press too. For the hell of it, I googled DeZarn while waiting for him to answer the phone. First thing up was this specimen of his marketing for Rubbermaid's brute heavyweight plastic garbage containers. And this is a passage from Joe DeZarn. The Zen Buddhists focus on the Noble Eightfold Path to enlightenment, which is comprised of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And a very good program it is, if I may venture an opinion. They've been working on this for quite a while and seem to have gotten the thing figured out. The real trick comes in when you attempt to apply these guidelines to the more mundane matters of day-to-day existence. Refuse containers, for example. You might throw your hands in the air and remark, "How can I worry about refuse containers when I'm busy pursuing enlightenment?" But that's when the Zen master smiles and thinks to himself, "No enlightenment for you." The point is that there are no exceptions to the Noble Eightfold Path, and that means refuse containers too. So let's explore the Zen of refuse containers together. Why did the Zen masters choose brute? Because it is the enlightened choice. That alone was enough to convince me that Joe DeZarn labors in hell. No matter how much they pay that man, the job cannot be worth it. So I had plenty of sympathy when I called him about an inside look at the plant. Quote, "Send me a request in writing," he said in a regionless, full-toned white man voice straight out of a Merrill Lynch commercial. I crafted my request and mailed it off. A lifelong friend who works at Rubbermaid, Tom Henderson, warned me that Rubbermaid is locked down tighter than a Dick's hat band. You'll never get in there. After 3 months of writing letters and playing phone tag with DeZarn, if writing letters and leaving phone messages that never get answered can be called tag, I concluded that Joe was too deeply absorbed in Zen reflection on Rubbermaid's styrene floor mop bucket / ringer combo to deal with more mortal issues such as those he was hired to handle, and I decided I would simply hang out with friends who work at Rubbermaid. There's more than one way to approach these heady climbs from which the world's plastic trash containers and spatulas issue. Hey, I warned you, Tom laughed. Like so many Heartland working class folks, Tom is a walking contradiction. At 58, he is a super at Rubbermaid and the wise old man and mentor of younger workers. He is rangy and dressed in denim with a huge cowboy belt buckle accenting his small pot gut. Redneck men should never be allowed to accessorize. And his smile is craggy and wry when he says things like, quote, "We will win the war on terrorism when we elect a man with the stones to use our nukes." Things Tom has done. Loaded bombs and missiles in Nha Trang, where he smoked mucho weed during the Vietnam War, graduated from a one-year electrical trade school on the GI Bill, operated his own small construction contracting business for a few years, got born again in Christ in 1976, though it seems to have worn off quite a bit since. He takes both Jim Beam and the Republican Party straight up. About the Jim Beam, he says, "Drunkenness is what God forbids, not drinking." At work, his radio is locked onto conservative talk shows, and at home, he watches mostly Fox TV. Like many blue-collar people here, Tom is not completely sure of the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate. As he understands democracy, everyone's opinion is of equal weight, informed or not. He has never been exposed to a union, never taken a college class, and does not expect too much out of life. Life is tough, he says. Suck it in. Don't take chances. Be conservative and stick with what you know. I have known Tom since 1957, when we were both little hayseeds from out in the sticks, arriving in what is now called middle school in plaid flannel monkey words catalog shirts that marked us as poor whites recently removed from our rural estates in the county. Town and country divisions were much greater back then, before the age of suburbs. Like most Winchester/Frederick County natives, we are sideways kin. According to genealogical records downtown at the library, Tom and I have common ancestors in this country, in town, dating back to the 1750s. I wouldn't want to guess about inbreeding in subsequent generations. After high school, we did what kids in our caste did and still do. We went into the military. He went to NAM and I went aboard the aircraft carrier USS America, CVA 66. After we were discharged, there was a period when we jammed on guitar together a few times and discovered we had more in common than bad imitations of Bob Dylan. Specifically, that intelligent green herb, which made us sort of hillbilly hipsters, with sensibilities and influences that lay somewhere between Carl Perkins, John Kennedy, and Timothy Leary, if you can imagine that. We dropped acid and ran women together, as they used to say around here. Ours was no spiritual or intellectual quest. Given this shared background, you can imagine my slack-jawed incomprehension when all these years later we meet again and I see that he has become a conservative hardliner and at least for a little while a born-again Christian, his zeal for Christ coming in the wake of, or maybe because of, a 15-round fight with heroin following the Vietnam War. Evidently, he did a little more than use pot over there. But these days, the once blonde, now graying man sharing a booth with me at Lynette's Triangle Diner, where they've had square meals since 1948, has the plain old nicotine fidgets. Quote, "They don't let you smoke in here anymore. Lynette says the diner is too damn small to allow smoking. Too hard to clean." Tom is typical of the ironclad, hard-ass people in this valley that this valley produces. A couple of years ago, he had a heart bypass operation. Quote, "At first I didn't feel that much better," he says, "but after I was home a couple of days, I said to hell with laying around, so I got a shovel and I dug a ditch and laid pipe for my drain field. Loosened me right up. What I needed was a good workout." By the time our country ham steaks and mashed potatoes are delivered, we are on the subject of unions, always a volatile topic down here. Tom is intensely anti-union, which amazes me since I can remember when he had a Che Guevara poster on his apartment wall. You'd think after 20 years in a southern factory, a guy would be begging union organizers to sweep through this town like Grant took Richmond. But Tom and most other plant workers here have brought the rightist mantra that goes, maybe unions were once valuable, but they have priced American labor completely out of the market. They always want more money for less production. Tom, like me, has heard this line from birth. We know it by heart. He still believes it. What? How can you be such a corporate advocate, I say? I'm not a corporate advocate. I'm for the common worker. When unions demand a 20% pay raise for the same amount of output and prevent management from firing the screw-offs, it raises the costs of everything. It makes it just that much harder for the average worker in a non-union job to survive. That was a quote from Tom. In Tom's world, quote, union workers getting paid $40 an hour are not the working man, but are, quote, greedy assholes who drive up the price of American cars so the rest of us can't afford them. Never mind that very few union workers make $40 an hour, or that union membership is down to about 12% of the American workforce, and by no means dictates the price of cars or anything else. It's maddening to talk to Tom on the subject, but when you do, you're talking to the real Joe Sixpack / NASCAR papa that the media bullshit about. Quote, give me one example of a union demanding a 20% pay increase for zero productivity growth. That was a slip up on my part. My people don't cite real facts. They recite what they have absorbed from the atmosphere. Theirs is an intellectual life consisting of things that sound right, a blend of modern folk wisdom, cliche, talk radio, and Christian radio babble. So I know there's no use in pointing out that corporations are very good at increasing productivity using every means available except increasing wages and benefits. Or that corporations are beholden to Wall Street, not to the workers, and vastly prefer agent sweatshops to the bargaining tables of free men and women. In Tom Henderson's world, there are no sweatshops. Quote, the Asians in the so-called sweatshops working for $2 a day are the middle class of their economy, he says. A limbagism if there ever was one. I cannot resist. So you think we all should be reduced to the same level of some guy on a sampan in Asia? Is that what you want for Americans? Well, pardon me, old buddy, he replies, poking around in his crumpled cigarette pack for a Camel. But I don't think anybody in Washington is asking Tom Henderson what he thinks. But the bottom line is that globalization is in our national interests. It's no wonder Tom cannot distinguish his own political interests. The very language used to talk about globalization hides its class structure. National interest is consistently yapped about in the media without defining exactly who is getting what and how much. So when American workers are told that the quote, Chinese are taking American jobs, no one points out that the China threat is just another global business partnership, one among Chinese elites who supply cheap labor, American capitalists who supply technology, and global capitalists who finance China's exports. Nor does one talk to Americans like Tom about universal health care or universal education, paid paternal leave, affordable housing, unemployment compensation, food stamps, or Head Start. These are shameful, quote, entitlements. More damn government giveaways, in Tom's opinion. Frills. Luxury you really don't need because we used to get along fine without them. If them people really want it, they will get up off of their lazy asses and work for it like I do. Fill in the blank as to who them people are. One of the slickest things the right ever did was to label necessary social costs as entitlements. Through 30 years of repetition, the Republicans have managed to associate the term with laziness in Americans' minds. To the ear of hardworking blue-collar and service workers, it means something for nothing. Undereducated, uninformed, but surely propagandized, these working Americans believe no part of their lives is subsidized in any way. Tom thinks that he has never benefited from the common weal because he has never been on welfare. He is proud never to have utilized any social program. He surely could have used a treatment program for substance abuse, but he found his way out of addiction with a hand from Jesus. Others can do the same. Quote, it comes down to gumption, Tom says. Childcare for single mothers or low-income housing subsidies, they ain't necessities, he draws. Our national narrative is about gumption, not giveaways. It's about good guys and bad guys, not social complexities. Weak-willed people and strong-willed people. It's about stories that sound right, political narratives that resonate without much effort or thought. The current political narratives are constructed by well-paid public relations professionals. Their job is made easy by the fact Tom has neither the time nor the experience to deal with political complexity or with anything else other than his job. The Tom DeLay scandal, the Abramoff scandal, wiretapping citizens without warrants, Republican cronyism, payoffs, charges of election fraud, none of it registered. All politicians are crooks seems to cover it adequately for Tom and others like him. The main thing is that the narrative be a simple one that makes clear whom to love and whom to hate, who is weak and who is strong. The truth matters far less than the sheer audacity of the story. Since the days of Ronald Reagan, Republicans have been good at coming up with such stories. Anyone who could sell people on the trickle-down theory, the notion that working people's best interests reside in giving as much money as possible to the already rich, is good. Then, too, only a subjugated lower class could possibly have bought it. During the Reagan era, the Republican myth machine widely circulated the black welfare baby sleeping in the box the color television came in story. I believed it at the time, and I'm sure Tom did too. Now, decades and hundreds of millions of PR dollars later, the overarching conservative Republican narrative has been perfected and is embraced by half of America. Along the Republican road between Lee Atwater and Karl Rove, it evolved into something more brazen and meaner. At the same time, the Toms of this country were no more equipped to debunk, say, the Carrie Swift boat story than they were the baby in the color TV box story. Even Tom, with direct experience in NAM, prefers to believe that Carrie's open discussions of U.S. war atrocities was an attack on working-class troops in an effort to get the college-educated vote. This belief in itself bespeaks class resentment of the spoiled rich Yaley pissing on the fighting man. Forget that Carrie was one of the few Yaleys to enlist. By the same token, when George W. Bush illegally wiretapped American citizens, quote, he did it for a good reason, to stop the terrorists right inside this country, says Tom, adding, you can't use the Constitution as an excuse for everything. When Tom stepped back and looked at George W. Bush and John Kerry, he saw the same thing we all did. Two guys, one who cuts brush on his ranch and another who goes windsurfing at Martha's Vineyard. Who the hell goes windsurfing? You can see the answer floating in the air over Tom's head. Spoiled, rich Eastern liberals and their snooty brats. Quote, and by the way, he adds, why do liberal candidates always take their suit jackets off during election cycles? Who do they think they're fooling? Well, they're fooling the same people who think George W. Bush really chops brush on his ranch, I answer, realizing that we are getting a bit combative. It's lame, he adds, these white shirt liberals who do all the sports like windsurfing and climbing up steep rocks for no good reason except to prove they are capable of working up a sweat. Tom's stereotyping is born of more than just listening to talk radio. Like tens of millions of other proud-to-be rednecks, he has neither the time nor the opportunity to read and learn about things because he's too busy working. The fact is that Tom does about 25 hours of contracting work after hours at Rubbermaid each week. Meanwhile, his fellow Rubbermaid workers, friends, and neighbors are pouring their own house foundations, changing their motor oil, or actually cutting the brush the president pretends to clear. Life is about work for the American redneck. By redneck, I mean all kinds of rednecks, not just the southern ones, ranging from Polish and Hungry stock rednecks of the Appalachian coal country to the Scandinavian ones of the logging Northwest. In the South and the Midwest, there are even Jewish rednecks who drive muscle cars and brawl and love country music. For all these people, work is an obsession and has been for generations, stretching back to the textile mills, the homesteads of West in the Midwest, the immigrant labor mines of West Virginia and Colorado and Montana, the subsistence farms of the South. The forebears of today's rednecks were people for whom not working meant their families would starve, literally. So the work ethic is burned into their genetic code. Incidentally, I am not talking about white trash here, I am talking about rednecks. The difference being that rednecks work themselves to death and will never accept a handout. White trash folks do not have the same hang-up. In the redneck mind, lazy is the worst thing a person can be. Worse than dumb, drunk, or mean. Worse than being a liar and a jailbird or crazy. The absolute worst thing that a redneck can say about anyone is, he doesn't want to work, which is generally followed by, hell, I don't want to either, but I have to. By the same logic, educated liberals who have time to read, who in fact read so much that they join book clubs, are suspect. Only one thing can bring such ceaseless activity to rest, a direct hookup between televised sports and the brain. And even then, it often requires vast amounts of beer, which I personally have no problem with, except that all this business and beer keeps us stupid and blind to the greater world. For most working people around here, the world outside Royal Lunch or Rubbermaid or Winchester, Virginia doesn't exist in any meaningful sense. Sure, there's the trip to Orlando or Branson, Missouri or Pennsylvania Dutch country, but if you spend your days at a soul-numbing, repetitious job, your evenings rotating your tires, rewiring your house, or hauling your aging mother a load of firewood, as Tom did the day after we had that conversation, or recovering on the couch from said job while contemplating your late fees on your credit cards, When are you supposed to find the time or the wherewithal to grasp the implications of global warming? You are brain dead, so a couple of evenings a week you stop by Royal Lunch and pour beer on the dead brain. A while back, I watched a bar full of people stare at a game of Afghani dead goat polo in silent, rapt attention. If that isn't brain dead, I don't know what is. Getting a lousy education, then spending a lifetime pitted against your fellow workers and the gladiatorial theater of the free market economy does not make for optimism or open-mindedness, both hallmarks of liberalism. It makes for a kind of bleak coarseness and inner degradation that allows working people to accept the American Empire's wars without a blink. Like most of conservative Winchester, Tom believes violence can be solved. Tom believes violence can solve foreign political problems. During political discussion around here, it is not uncommon to hear someone talk about the Middle East or some Asian or European country getting out of line and needing to be put in its place. Any day of the week, I can easily show you 100 people who believe we should bomb France, though I doubt many of them could readily find it on a map. For a certain kind of American, it seems, bombing anyone, anywhere, helps purge some unarticulated inner rage. Rage that the easy truisms that once seemed to lend nobility to the dullest of lives are no longer believable. So long as Americans agreed that they were brave and true and exceptional, people toward whom the entire world looked, for example, and so long as they wrapped themselves in the cloak of that self-anointed goodness, their lives had meaning. No insight required. Just add religious faith. Being an American was something to cherish, something worth defending, preferably on the enemy's turf. So what happens if you're Tom Henderson and you spend in more than 20 years at the plant and let every unique aspect of yourself atrophy so you could do the American dream by the numbers, only to find that cloak of goodness torn? 20 years at the same job in the same church, 30 years of good credit, and you look up to find that your wife suffers from chronic depression and that terrorists crashed airplanes into New York. And whispered rumor again has it that Rubbermaid is moving your job to Asia, and television pundits loudly proclaim the impending death of the Social Security system you've been counting on to be there for you, though you never admit it openly because, well, it's a handout, an entitlement. America didn't used to be this way, Tom laments. People have fucked up this country. He's not sure who. It certainly wasn't him, but in the harsh new light outside the cloak of goodness, there are some very likely suspects, starting with weirdo university professors, union racketeers, and the rich California ACLU types. People who never worked for a living, he says. It all started to go to hell during the 60s. So Tom is anti-liberal and willing to nuke Tehran. Dessert, honey? The waitress at the Triangle Diner asks. I say no, and Tom and I begin the standard Southern wrestling match for the check. I win with the lie that it's deductible for me. On the way to the parking lot, I suggest we ought to get together and play some music, you old fart. Man, I ain't picked up my guitar in years, says Tom. I can tell you from experience that you never forget, you just get rusty. Okay, well, maybe we'll do that sometime, he says. Both of us know that, for more reasons than you can shake a stick at, as the old folks here say, it will never happen. The chasm of time and experience is too great. Tom and I did not discuss his job at Rubbermaid. The details of being a floor sweeper are not that interesting in print or in practice. What haunted me as he spoke was this. Tom is every bit as intelligent as I am. He was a better writer than I was in high school and often said back then that his goal in life was to be a writer, painter, musician. Where do those dreams go? The same place any such dreams go for the children of lower working class families. They go out the same door that opportunity for a decent education never walks in through. They vanish along the trails of places like Vietnam or the dusty streets of Iraq. They disappear between high school graduation and the immediate need to earn a living that follows graduation. Rednecks are not much for living with mommy and daddy past the age of 12. It leaves you hardened, and it leaves you standing in the human relations room at Rubbermaid, filling out an application to bust yellow, wet floor signs off of a hot mold, or to work the night shift, snaking electrical wire through conduit in a windowless concrete city. And once you've accepted your lot as a citizen of that nocturnal city, you get even harder. Newell Rubbermaid truly is a city of its own at the edge of Winchester, according to my son and others who work there. Each production department is a sort of neighborhood under the watch of the Rubbermaid Police Department, plant security, and each has its own drug traffic. Dope in factories is sold by fellow workers, so it is generally more dependable than dope available on the street because the seller has to face his customers every day. As would be accepted in a relentless factory environment, the drugs of choice are methamphetamine and pot to help get down off of the speed. Consequently, piss testing is a fact of working life. Numerous situations require a piss test, including unusual behavior, but especially accidents. Fail a piss test and you're fired. In the pre-Newell days of Rubbermaid, if you tested positive for drugs, you could keep your job if you went into drug counseling or rehab. Now it's one strike and you're out. Consequently, pot smokers who regularly fail piss tests find themselves moving from job to job. The Dollar General Warehouse, General Electric, White House Apple Products, before bottoming out at one of the local family-owned feudal outfits for $5.50 or $6 an hour. And even that last rung of the local employment ladder is usually occupied by someone named Martinez or Delgado. Back in 1994, Rubbermaid was voted the most admired American company by Fortune magazine. Such yap from the corporate community is tiresome fare, yet Rubbermaid was not entirely undeserving. The company paid a living wage, and despite corporate management's attraction to cracker labor in the anti-union South, many of its plants in other regions of the country were still unionized. Since its arrival in the 1960s, the company had made a nice return on its investments in Winchester, and eventually, after blacks like the legendary Betty Kilby Fisher hammered at the color barrier erected by Rubbermaid's good old boy local management. See the book Wilt, Will, and Walls by Betty Kilby Fisher. It was considered a better than average place to work by people of both races. Winchester was grateful for Rubbermaid's presence. Plenty of folks my age spent their entire working lives in the plant. Respectable working folks who bought homes, retired on its programs, and turned back months of sick leave when they departed. By these people's standards, many of the current employees would have been considered Winchester's dregs, people who, in Tom's view, just drift from job to job. I was itching to reply, pushed from job to job, thanks to the new flexible labor market, but I didn't. At any rate, just a few years after being hailed as the most admired company in America, North America's largest plastic products company was a foundering corporation, brought down by the boys from Bentonville, Arkansas. Walmart sells by far the greatest volume of Rubbermaid products of any retail chain. Given such an advantage, in 2001, Walmart's executive management team heavied up on Rubbermaid, demanding ridiculously low prices despite an 80% increase in the cost of raw materials and personal pleas by Rubbermaid CEO Joseph Galley. Galley begged, Walmart stood firm. Later, when Rubbermaid refused to go along with Walmart's utterly unworkable price, Walmart dropped the hammer. It pulled Rubbermaid products off the shelves, replacing them with knockoffs manufactured by Sterilite, a little-known Massachusetts company. Sterilite soared. Rubbermaid died. After seeing its sales drop 30%, Rubbermaid caved. During those dark days, Newell, which has a slash-and-burn reputation for whipping companies into shape, took the Rubbermaid helm and began dancing to the tune coming out of Bentonville, Arkansas, Lose the U.S. Plants. Right, boss. Since January 2001, Rubbermaid has shut down 69 of its 400 facilities and fired 11,000 workers, all to accommodate Walmart. At the outset of the shutdowns, C. Mark Hielsen, Equity Research Director at Associated Trust and Company, stated that Rubbermaid would have to, quote, shift about 50% of production to low-cost countries, forcing an estimated closing of 131 Rubbermaid facilities and the firing of 20,000 workers. 5 years later, thanks to the cuts and the addition of the Goody Hair Care products line, Rubbermaid announced 2006 third quarter net income of $108.5 million, happily exceeding Wall Street forecasts. At the same time, in October of 2006, Newell Rubbermaid conducted a live webcast auction of its 1 million square foot Arizona injection molding plant. Bidders from around the world participated via the internet. Newell is not the first company to gouge our local labor force or move plants abroad. It's a damn sorry story, one that has become a textbook case for business students everywhere, and an example widely cited by anti-globalists. But the employees at Rubbermaid do not know it. Why bother to keep the toiling riffraff informed? Even if they knew, they probably would not stop shopping at Walmart. Like most Americans, they have never boycotted anything. In their minds, boycotts are for dark-skinned people, a notion that probably has its roots in the lunch counter boycotts of the 50s and 60s. Besides, Walmart is the cheapest store, and they want the lowest prices. And to take advantage of those everyday low prices, they need to hang on to their jobs. So Rubbermaid employees, in the true spirit of Southern Protestant self-worthlessness, being grateful for the blessing God bestows every day, are grateful to Rubbermaid just for being in town. As for Cadereyta, the Mexican broomstick capital that Winchester beat out, it too is being devoured by Walmart. America's biggest corporation is now the biggest private employer in Mexico, grossing more money than Mexico's entire tourist industry, $13.5 billion versus $11.8 billion in 2005. What worked in the United States works in Mexico. Ever cheaper goods, lower wages, union smash, local businesses ruined. But just like American employees, working mooks down there love these precious bajos. They're not complaining, yet. Rubbermaid forklift driver Nance Willingham has never heard of Cadereyta. 33, hillbilly cute, and a single mother raising 2 kids with the help of her mom. She is qualified to operate a reach lift machine, which is a kind of forklift that can reach 20 feet up and into stacks of pallets. Given the physical rigor of the work, there are relatively few women at Rubbermaid, so the divorced and single women who do work there are the objects of much sexual interest. Active in her church, Nance does not drink and seldom dates. She is predictably anti-union and anti-abortion, and is only vaguely aware of NOW, which is the National Organization for Women, which registers in her mind as, quote, a bunch of lesbians out on the West Coast. They are, quote, weird women like the ones on TV a while back from single mothers by choice. Why would anyone want to have a baby and raise it without a husband on purpose? It's hard enough when you do have one, for Pete's sake. Nance is a Republican pretty much by default. She doesn't think of herself as one, but she votes Republican every time. Because of her caste, lower working class, Southern, high school educated, fundamentalist Christian, she does not personally know a single registered Democrat. I know you, she offered. That doesn't count, I replied, because I am a godless commie. Inconceivable though it may be to some urban Americans, it is easily possible for many working Americans not to know a person of the liberal persuasion. Why? Partly because the middle-class liberals are uncomfortable being around people like Nance. She lives in a modular home close to the interstate and is raising 2 kids, one of whom has ADHD, is half black, and was fathered by her ex with a previous wife. She sends her kids to a Christian academy on scholarship. Fundamentalist Christian schools, which sprang up everywhere after the public schools were desegregated in the 60s, are always glad to have a token black to help counter charges of racism. On Friday nights, she feeds the kids a big bag of tortilla chips and cheese dip washed down with Pepsi and calls it supper. It's a family favorite. Considered a treat by the kids and a break from cooking for Nance and her mom, who also works, though fewer hours than Nance. Nance has pride and integrity. She serves and mams everyone her own age or older. She always has had a job, has never taken a penny from her parents, and has paid her bills on time since she graduated from high school. Her mom says once in high school, she put a skirt and jacket on layaway at a store where she worked during the Christmas season. It was slow season, so they laid her off way early. That girl gathered aluminum cans in the freezing snow to make the weekly payments. Nance's political and cultural world is entirely defined by media of the lowest and broadest common denominator, by her church and by her workplace, especially her workplace. When it comes to plants like Rubbermaid and the folks who work in them, you're talking about millions of people who are not on political mailing lists, couldn't care less about what is on the internet, and would not know a BlackBerry from a garage door opener. They spend 8 hours a day listening to talk radio through earphones at work. and they are aware of the politics of their supervisors and bosses. It would be wrong to say that supervisors put pressure on workers like Nance to vote conservative. They don't have to. They merely let their politics be known, and the desire to curry favor with the boss does the rest. In this work environment, employees suck up reflexively. Consequently, people like Nance listen closely to the alpha male supervisor in the break room for clues about opinions they should and should not hold or express, not only about politics but also about anything else that might go against the grain in the plant environment. Naturally, there is the ever-present anti-union pressure. From the first employee training and indoctrination sessions, Newell Rubbermaid makes the corporate position clear. This is not really necessary. We learned the lesson as kids. I remember my 9th grade history teacher at Handley High School spending an entire classroom hour on, quote, communist labor unions. The same teacher, rest his soul, also told us that coloreds are happy enough to have a coontail on their car antennas and a plate of fried chicken on their table. Meanwhile, inside the radio headphones of Nance and everyone else allowed to tune in while working at Rubbermaid, talk radio squawks, honks, and howls indignantly about the state of the Republic. The rants of Rush Limbaugh, Gordon Liddy, Michael Reagan, and other right-wing talk jocks are interspersed with debt consolidation commercials. Quote, sometimes I listen to contemporary Christian stations, but they play the same thing over and over and over, explains Nance. So she keeps drifting back to talk radio. Today our guest is John Lee Cleary, former Ku Klux Klansman, now ministering for our Lord and Savior. His new book is named From Klan to Christ. Good morning, John. And sometimes local modern country stations where ultra-conservatism is a given. The politically indifferent and non-religious listen to classic rock. It is safe to say that radio supplies the workers with most of their knowledge of things political. Most do not subscribe to a newspaper, and the political influence of their favorite network, Fox, is somewhat overrated out here, except in the hypnagogic sense, which is admittedly no small thing. But that intimate radio space that fills the void of shift work, if you've ever done 8 hours straight, cutting tabs off of molded plastic or stacking pallets, you know how powerful the sound of relentless one voice speaking to the many. It is to those working in headphone space, that bubble of radio reality within the roaring of machines. For 8 hours, it is a voice inside your head that sounds like your own voice. Ask any assembly line worker, night janitor, or house painter. Still, none of the above is the core reason why Nance votes Republican. Organized as the hard right-wing push it has been, its success among working people is due as much to widespread misconception about what is going wrong with America as it is due to any master plan devised by new conservatism, though neoconservative planning has always played a part. The new conservatism arose in the same way left-wing movements do, by approximately the same process, and for the same reasons. Widespread but unacknowledged dissatisfaction, in this case with the erosion of the traditional life and values in America, as working people perceive them, otherwise known as change. Unease had been growing for decades before the Republican Revolution of 1994. It has been the backdrop to Nance's entire life. When the Republicans gave it a name and a nail to hang upon, people like Nance, Tom, Poot, and the rest stepped forward to claim it. There is no good reason why, for the past 30 years, the uncertainty and dissatisfaction of people like Tom and Nance was automatically snubbed as unenlightened by so many on the left. If the left had identified and dealt with the dissatisfaction early on, if they had counteracted the fallacies the Republicans used to explain the dissatisfaction, if they had listened instead of stereotyping blue-collar angst as Archie bunkerism, itself a stereotype of a stereotype delivered into their minds by television, and maybe offered some gutsy, comprehensible, and practical solutions, we might have witnessed something better than the Republican syndicate's lying and looting of the past 6 years. Real movements take advantage of the protest potential to be found among dissatisfied and disappointed people. People disenfranchised by bureaucracy, technocracy, and experts. Rightists tapped into that dissatisfaction by lamenting the loss of community and values and attributing it to the cultural left's feminism and anti-racism the gay movement, and so on. The Republican message, baloney though it is, was accessible to Nance. The Democrats didn't have any message at all. As it stands now, Nance has no political leadership whatsoever. Nobody stands up for the interests of people like her unless a few of them get crushed under a seam of coal, thereby providing the required emotional grist for the nightly news. Only right-wing politicians appealing to their religious prejudices and ignorance on behalf of big money pay any attention to them. If you hang around real working class places very long, whether it be the young folks' Ruby Tuesdays at the Apple Blossom Mall or the old guys' Royal Lunch down by the tracks, you'll see that decent working folks seldom talk politics or current events, except during the final week before an election and when prompted by lefty agitators like me or grassroots neocon Republican operatives, people who understand that the four cornerstones of American political psyche are 1. Emotion substituted for thought, 2. Fear, 3. Ignorance, and 4. Propaganda. When the United States attacked Iraq, there was a mood swing at Royal Lunch, an occasional brief mention of the war, but no real discussion of it. The middle-class white professionals, Fern and Pale Ale joints downtown, were all fired up for the war their president had launched. But at Royal Lunch, as usual, discussion revolved around sports, movies, where to get good ribs and seafood, and why GM can't seem to build a good engine. Not exactly amazing, given that our national reality is television. Nothing else holds us together politically except fear, and even that is generated through our TV sets. So when television's one voice tells the many to support the troops, we say to ourselves, that sounds like the right thing to do, and we write mental notes to ourselves saying, support our troops. Then we have a beer. As I've said, the intellectual lives of most working-class Americans consist of things that sound as if they might be true, and that is why millions are spent on sound bites and sloganeering. To the extent that we can be said to hold beliefs, we hold the belief that we think... to the extent that we can be said to hold beliefs, we hold the beliefs we think we are expected to hold. Just as we hold little American flags and put magnetic ribbons on our cars and tell others who we believe we are, Americans and Americans only. Plain Americans, isolated from the rest of the world by certainty that it's better to be an American than anything else, even if we can't really prove why. Even if we are one house payment away from homelessness, even if our kids can't read and our asses are getting so big they have their own zip codes, it's comforting to know we are at least in the best place on earth. There's America, and there's the rest of the world, envious and plotting to bring us down and steal our freedom. Enter the shitsters, or more politely, political activists such as Loretta Barr. Many of the entrenched bad attitudes that internet liberals attribute to memes are simply the work of these wicked messengers, nothing more than lies sold at the retail level, best countered at the grassroots level, where they are distributed. In towns like Winchester, you can more easily see the grassroots working of far-right politics in bars, clubs, and fraternal organizations than by monitoring blogs or newspapers. One thing I've noticed is that the Republicans' everyday lives seem naturally woven into the fabric of the community in a way that the everyday lives of the left have not been since the Great Depression and the social justice movement of the 60s. Despite the class system of these towns, many rich Republicans still meet the small business class and working class on their own turf. And working class people encounter Republicans face-to-face at churches, all-you-can-eat spaghetti fundraisers, fraternal organizations like the Elks Club, and local small businesses. The Republican ideals of old have always had a solid lock in the heartlands, and all that proximity can lead to identification. Consequently, on an evening like this one, you find people like Loretta Barr drinking a few beers with the proles at the tavern, Mac the house painter, Rubbermaid second shift workers Tom and Nance, who usually drinks one Diet Coke then leaves, plus a couple of others who pull chairs up near the table to hear the great lady's thoughts. Just sitting at her table is to them a social honor, one big enough that Nancy might even stay and have 2 Diet Cokes tonight. Loretta is one of the town's bigger, but by no means biggest, landlords, with 200 or 300 residential units, many of them in the blighted North End, and she is, of course, a realtor. Loretta, age 50, wears sharp business suits during the day, and sports Mac Studio and Nordstrom's casual after-work wear and royal lunch. She is a millionaire several times over, and she runs the family real estate and rental business like a machine. Quote, I do not fool around. The eviction process begins the minute they are late enough on rent to start the paperwork, she says, taking a sip of Sam Adams. She is a 24-hour-a-day Republican operative and enforcer, along with her ceaseless activism in City Hall against tenants' rights and property taxes. Houses that are converted to multi-unit slum properties here pay the same taxes as single-family dwellings, despite the strains they put on city services. She also spends some bar time bad-mouthing progressive politics and anything remotely related to the Democratic Party, which is what she's doing on this particular evening in June. Loretta can make hay out of anything. The Winchester Star has been running a story about a local woman who got 20 years for giving pornographic photos of her 13-year-old daughter to her husband, who is in prison for abusing the daughter. The porno woman's picture is plastered on the front page at every opportunity the editors can think up. Hers is a face straight out of a Dorothy Lang Dust Bowl photo. The gusto with which Winchester enjoys such a spectacle is a reminder that our town was founded amid a welter of public dunkings, floggings, and witchcraft charges. Salem was not alone in that dark, superstitious era. The Yankees, however, seem to have gotten beyond it. Loretta is exhorting the drinkers at her table. This is beyond disgusting. A woman who takes pornographic photos of her 13-year-old daughter for her own husband in prison, who has abused the same girl. I would bet money that the ACLU comes to her rescue. She's just the kind of person liberals and Democrats champion. Loretta pronounces the word liberal with contempt. When a less biased voice points out that she may be going a little bit overboard, she says, ever heard of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association? They have a seat at the Democratic Convention in 2000. Official delegates. Boy Scouts were booed at the convention, but NAMBLA got seated. Dems, liberals, they're all the same. So where did you hear about the Boy Scouts being booed at by the National Democrats? Asked Tom, who I believe has a Boy Scout grandson. The Scout District Commissioner brought it up at our meeting, says Loretta. Later, I Googled this piece of information. The only reference I could find was on two conservative websites, Newsmax.com and FreeRepublic.com, which mirrored her remarks right down to the, quote, I heard it at a troop meeting from a district commissioner. Loretta adds, the Democrats are trying to brand the Scouts as a hate group. Looking around the two tables pushed together, I can see that people seem a little disturbed. No one questions Loretta's veracity because of her social and economic status. In the American provinces, especially the southern ones, wealth is proof of God's love and bestows the power to mess over anyone who disagrees with you. Even putting this aside, it seems prudent to Nance, I'm sure, to avoid any political party that considers the Boy Scouts as a hate group. I see this very kind of thing happen nearly every day on local internet forums and bulletin boards. In a very real sense, this is internet-driven Republican outreach, something for which there is no meaningful liberal equivalent. Robust as the Democratic blogosphere is, Democrats seem less inclined than Republicans to run downtown and spread the word in person. Perhaps they simply do not have as many party operatives at the grassroots level. Perhaps they do not have the same strong self-interest at stake as Loretta, whose real estate taxes and income are so directly affected by the party in power. In any case, coupled with GOP hate talk radio all day, the network of GOP operatives creates a powerful propaganda double whammy. The key is misrepresentation and guilt by association. A good example is using the saw of less government to associate presumed government inefficiency with Social Security. Rather than abolish Social Security outright, which the right knows cannot be done because it remains the most popular government program ever created, the neoconservatives recommend privatizing it to make it more efficient and increase returns on retirees' investments. Or, as Tom says, let the pros on Wall Street handle it. Everybody knows how wasteful and inefficient government bureaucracies are. The truth is something that conservatives will never admit. The administrative costs of Social Security are far lower than the administrative costs of any private sector company, only 3.5% of its annual budget, according to the Government Accounting Office. But in tying Social Security to the notion of government waste, Conservatives translate the issue into terms that the ordinary Joe who spends $40 and most of a day at a DMV trying to get a postage stamp sized license plate sticker can understand. To spread its message, the GOP has a huge number of grassroots operatives. They turn up everywhere, at city council meetings and in the letters column of the local newspaper. Whenever they spot an opportunity to inject a slogan or recite some conservative rhetoric or retell a concocted story from Newsmax, Town Hall, or Front Page, they take it. That's why the GOP has such a unified response to any liberal message. The nationwide grassroots network of zealous conservatives such as Loretta recruits manpower for the entire GOP. At the humble level of the small town, local candidates are raised and groomed for state and national office, backed by a host of Lorettas contributing and working the crowds and writing letters to the editor. And it is from these local grassroots GOP business-based cartels that the army of campaign volunteers, political activists, and spokesmen springs. The result is that even though the social and economic visions of the ultra-rightists are repulsive, the rightists succeed at forcing their vision of America down our throats because they have committed themselves to organization and communication. They had a setback in 2006, and they may have more setbacks in 2008, but they are dedicated to victory at any costs. Liberals, in contrast, chatter among themselves online or at social gatherings and make little attempt to engage, much less convert the heathen tribes. Eventually, they will have to come out here into the real world and stroke guys like Old Pooty for his vote. An unpleasant job, if ever there was one, but I'm sure he'll enjoy the attention. Meanwhile, regardless of the 2006 midterm victories, shit-stirring is still working for Loretta and still works for the Republicans everywhere. It doesn't work for me, which is why Loretta and I are sworn enemies. Enemies enough to leave royal lunch when the other walks in, although sometimes we both stay if we happen to be drunk enough to be looking for a good fight. Of course, all the Republican shit-stirring in the world would be useless if there were no working-class anger or anxiety to be tapped. Working folks may not spend much time mouthing off about politics, but many sure as hell fester inside about their lives and livelihoods. And many, if not most, working-class people around this town feel deep anger that has very little to do with their issues ballyhooed by their political and religious leaders. They are not especially exercised about queer eye for the straight guy, or about the sacrifice of unborn children, though if you ask them, they will certainly find both unpalatable. The source of their anger is more fundamental. It's the daily insults they suffer from their employers, from their government, and from more educated fellow Americans, the doctors, lawyers, journalists, academics, and others who quietly disdain working folks. The seemingly hateful values that many working-class people display when it comes to sexuality and race are not rooted in any inherent malevolence. The Tom Hendersons who once loved to play folk guitar on the porch at night did not mutate into the Ironheart he is today out of his own volition. Nam did part of it, the increasing brutality of the American workplace and being pitted against every other working American did most of the rest. Tom was strong enough to beat heroin, but was no match against the increasing meanness at the heart of our republic, for which his youth was vaporized in the face of war. The tide of our national meanness rises incrementally, one brutalizing experience at a time, inside one person at a time, in a chain of working-class Americans stretching back for decades. Back to the terror-filled 19-year-old girl from Weirton, West Virginia, who patrols the sweat-smelling halls of one of the Empire's far-flung prisons at midnight. Back to my neighbor's 80-year-old father, who remembers getting paid $2 apiece for literally cracking open the heads of union organizers at our textile and sewing mills during the days of Virginia's bird political machine. It was the Depression, and the old man needed the money to support his family. The brutal way in which America's hardest working folks historically were forced to internalize the values of a gangster capitalist class continues to elude the left, which, with few exceptions, understands not a thing about how this political and economic system has hammered the humanity out of ordinary working people. Much of the ongoing battle for America's soul is about healing the souls of these Americans and rousing them from the stupefying glut of commodity and spectacle. It is about making sure that they and we refuse to accept torture as acts of heroes and babies deformed by depleted uranium as the price of freedom. Caught up in the great self-referential hologram of imperial America, force-fed goods and hubris like fattened steers, working people like world championship wrestling and Confederate flags and flat-screen televisions and the idea of an American empire. American empire, I like the sound of that, they think to themselves, without even the slightest idea what it means historically. The people doing our hardest work and fighting our wars are not altruistic and probably never were. They don't give a rat's bunghole about the world's poor or the planet or animals or anything else. Not really. The people like cheap gas. They like chasing post-Thanksgiving Day Christmas sales. And if fascism comes, they will like that too if the cost of gas isn't too high and if Comcast comes through with a 24-hour NFL channel. That is the American hologram. That is the peculiar illusion we live within, the illusion that holds us together, makes us alike, yet tells each of us that we are unique. And it will remain in force until the whole shittery comes down around our heads. Working people do not deny reality. They create it from the depths of their perverse ignorance, even as the so-called left speaks in non sequiturs and wonders why it cannot gain any political traction. Meanwhile, for the people, it is football and NASCAR and a republic free from married queers and trigger locks on guns. That's what they voted for, an armed and moral republic. And that's what we get when we stand by and watch the humanity get hammered out of our fellow citizens, letting them be worked cheap and farmed like a human crop for profit. Genuine moral values have jack to do with politics, but in an obsessively religious nation, values remain the most effective smokescreen for larceny by the rich and hatred and fear by the rest. What Christians and so many quiet, ordinary Americans were voting for in the presidential elections of 2000 and 2004 was fear of human beings culturally unlike themselves, particularly gays and lesbians and Muslims and other non-Christians. That's why in 11 states, Republicans got constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage on the ballot. In 9 of them, the bill passed easily. It was always about fearing and, in worst cases, hating the other. Being a Southerner, I have hated in my lifetime. I can remember schoolyard discussions of supposed, N-word knifing of white boys at night and such. And like most people over 50, it shows in my face because that age we have, And like most people over 50, it shows in my face because by that age we have the faces we deserve. Likewise, I've seen hate in others and know it when I see it. And I am seeing more of it now than ever before in my lifetime, which is saying something considering that I grew up down here during the Jim Crow era. Fanned and nurtured by neoconservative elements, the hate is every bit equal to the kind I saw in my people during those violent years. Irrational, deeply rooted, based on inchoate fears. Inchoate fears. The fear is particularly prevalent in the middle and middle classes here, the very ones most openly vehement about being against using the words like the N-word and fuck. They are what passes for educated people in a place like Winchester. You smell their fear of losing their advantages and money, fear there won't be enough time to grab and stash enough geet to keep themselves and their offspring in Chardonnay and farting through the silk for the next 50 years. So they keep the light machine and the smoke generators cranking full blast as long as possible, hoping to elect another one of their own kind to the White House. Democratic or Republican, it doesn't matter so long as they keep the scam going. The Loretta Barr speaking in knowing, authoritative tongues, and the inwardly fearful house painter and the single mom forklift driver listen and nod. Why take a chance on voting for a party that would let homos be scoutmasters? During Christmas week in 2005, the neocon grassroots network was humming along. 2 days before Christmas, a Republican operative named Ted was vigorously circulating on Winchester internet forums a bogus Republican Christmas story. And this is the Christmas story. The title is Democrat Landlord Bilks Republicans Homeless Shelter. This is the body of it. A liberal lawyer in Los Angeles was thrown nearly has thrown nearly 36 homeless center residents back on the street because of something he finds indefensible. The center's founder is a Republican and voted for Bush. ... According to the story, some 30 men, women, and children were forced into the streets by the heartless liberal Democrat, a wicked landlord and a lawyer to boot, who jacked up the rent from $2,500 per month to $18,333 per month. The shelter operator, a fellow named Ted Hayes, allegedly forsook a middle-class lifestyle years ago to live on the streets and give succor to the homeless. He is a bit too conveniently quoted as saying, "I support President Bush, and I support the Republican Party." Near the end of the story, we find the one final bit of guilt added to the lily. Hayes is black. That's the thing about the neocon smoke and lie machine. It's relentless. It just never lets up. Not even at Christmas. 30 years ago, the Loritas and the Teds of Winchester and Red State America were doing the same thing, leading the Nances and Toms around by their noses. It's a class system, and members of Lorita's class are issued silver-plated nose hooks at birth. Their relationship with each other and with the world are the same as when they were in high school. We knew damn well who was going to work at the Rubbermaids and who was going to work at the fruit packing lines. Everyone still occupies the same niche in the small-town caste system, even though we are now more of a small city. Everyone still sees the world from his or her small berth in that limited system. New York City is still seen as a crime-ridden hell, into which no sane person would ever set foot. France is the land of the gutless, pussy-eating frogs. Most disturbingly, the Iraq War, despite all the noise, is at this writing in 2006 a distant thing that occasionally spits a coffin in our direction, containing some local working-class son or daughter. The flag-draped box is shown on the front page of the local paper. Everyone salutes and remarks on how sad it is, but really nobody but the soldier's family and church gives a hoot. They really don't. You can see it in their eyes. The new Washington Nationals baseball franchise over in D.C. gets far more discussion about their baseball than in the war. Dead locals or no dead locals. It is one of the hologram's biggest media myths that small towns are thrown into deep mourning when one of their young is killed in Iraq. There was a time when that would have been true, but long ago our lives were numbed by the money grind and by birth-to-death drenching in marketing and messages and sports spectacle, by the complete absence of genuine public questioning of the notion that America is the best nation on earth, superior in all things, and therefore unassailable. Consequently, there is growing dissatisfaction with the war, but in this town at least, it is because we are not winning, not because of the dead. A community that has become so numb that it no longer mourns its own dead cannot be called a community, and certainly cannot be expected to mourn the children of Iraq. People so trapped in an imagined America, projected daily for profit by the media, cannot possibly grasp how the massacre of innocent people thousands of miles away can be used to condition in them a reflexive nationalist spirit, fostering a vacant unity in the place of the profound degeneration of our republic. To me, the most profound sort of moral blindness in heartland America is born of innocent trust in our system. The other day, while loading groceries into my truck at the Food Lion parking lot, I ran into an old high school flame, Carolyn. At 58 years old, she's still at Rubbermaid, where she has worked for 20 years. Because of that, she is still a trim, hard-body knockout with buns of steel and a country girl smile that takes 10 years off her face if it takes a day. It makes a blubbery old fat guy like me feel like crawling under my truck until she drives away. But I managed to say hello and make that 60 seconds of obligatory Southern small talk. A hi bye is not enough down here and is usually considered a snub. Noticing that Carolyn had 4 different kinds of support our troops magnetic ribbons on her Toyota, I said, "Damn, Carolyn, couldn't you find space for another ribbon?" "Actually," she sighed, "there was another one, but..." "Oops. The money from the magnetic ribbons goes to support our troops," she replied. "Who told you that?" "Nobody. I just figure it does. Why else would they make 'em?" I looked at her broad, girlish, grown older face and curly salt and pepper hair, and what I saw was not ignorance, though that too was there, but trust in some non-existent system of the way things ought to be. It's the sort of thing that makes college-educated people snicker when they encounter it, but is honest and unencumbered by cynicism. The disconnect in this country can be so damn stunning sometimes that you don't know whether to laugh or to cry, or what to say in the face of it. "So, how's Ron and the kids?" I asked, with 30 seconds still to go. In 4 hours, Carolyn will walk through the doors of the concrete city of night and attach Rubbermaid safety gear onto that beautiful hard body, and she, like Tom and Nance, suspended in that crushing silence inside her noise protection earmuffs, will never once ask herself why anybody has the right to make her pee into a bottle on demand, or whether the Democrats really do support the man-boy love crowd, or that most burning question of all, why did the Zen masters choose Brute? The end. I don't know how to turn this off.